In this tutorial, we learn more about session listeners in our Java web application and how to use them to track sessions and respond to session events. We will review our two previous session tutorials, and we will look at the Jakarta Servlet session documentation. We will attempt to understand the concept of session listeners in the Jakarta Servlet API. We will look at how listeners can detect various session activities. We'll look at examples of the listener interface implementations. And we'll also look at how to implement session listeners. We will introduce a custom session listener in our charity registration application. We will do that with a session listener Java class. And we will also add an in-memory session database class. And then we will run it and look at how the logic interacts. We are going over to the documentation, and we look at our first session lesson. Here we learned why sessions are necessary. We learned how to work with cookies and URL parameters, and we looked at the definition of a cookie. We looked at the OWASP security testing guide. And we also looked at the Tomcat 9 secure sockets layer. We set up our own session configuration, and we expanded our charity registration module with a charity session servlet in which we manage the charity categories. And here is the do get part. And we also added a new JSP page, and we have a view charity session object page, and we ran it and demonstrated it. Going back to our main menu, and we go to our second session lecture, where we looked at maintaining state, a link to the official Jakarta Servlet specification. And here we created a second example that stored the page visits. We have a page visit object, and then we have the activity session servlet, which recorded the session activities, updated the page visits, and allowed us to view the session activity. Here is our JSP, showed us all the details of the session activity. And once again, if we go back to the lecture, we actually demonstrated it. And now back to the main menu in our documentation, and we select part 3 of maintaining state using sessions. So what we are going to do next is to add a session listener part to our charity registration web application. And we will do that through a session listener class that implements these two session listener interfaces. And as we see, we have a session created event, we have a session destroyed event, we have a session ID change event, and we output formatted date. We are going to maintain a list of active sessions through our implementation of two listener interfaces. And we have our session listener Java. We will also add an in-memory session database that will store all the heap references to all created session objects. We will add, remove, and update session references to the in-memory database when the sessions are created, destroyed, or updated. And of course, we need a new session list servlet and a new sessions.jsp in order to display the sessions. And here we are in Eclipse, and we'll look at our session listener first. We have overridden the session created where we display it in the log and we add it to the in-memory session database. We do the same for when it's destroyed. We display it and we remove it. And when it's changed, we update it. We also have a date formatter for formatting the date output. We added the session list servlet with the URL of sessions. And what we do here is we add the number of sessions to the request as an attribute. We add the list of sessions to the request as an attribute. And then we forward it to the session template ASP to display it. And here is our session template ASP. We display the total number of sessions that is active. We do a for each through each of the session objects. We get the username and the ID. And now we are ready to run and debug our application. And we'll start with testing a couple of these users from different browsers. Debug as debug on server, charity registration, and we'll start with Nicholas. And here is the list of our active sessions, the session ID and the user ID. So now let's try and approach it from a different browser. We used a Microsoft browser and we'll use a different user. And let's list the sessions. And we see this is the net. And we also see Nicholas. Let's go back to the other browser and list sessions. And it still lists Nicholas as the current user, but it also lists the net. We can actually add a third browser. And we'll use the Tom user. The sessions. And here we have the Tom user logged in. We'll go back to Nicholas user and it shows the other two users logged in. And we go back to the Donnet user and it lists Donnet as the user and the other two users logged in. Now let's go back to our code. Here's our session listener. Here is our session template. And for self-study and self-challenge, you can add more template information here to give you the time difference, as we've done with our previous charity session object, or as we've done with our new session activity. As a challenge, you can try and put this to string with a time interval into a custom template function and see how you fare in terms of putting it or adding it to the session template. And that concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next one.